Hey there, I'm Garrett, and I've managed to secure myself a guest spot in this video. I'm going to be talking a bit about how capitalism is represented in Rocky, and then I'll introduce the next segment of the video about the relationship between sport, nationalism, and politics. Oh, and for the American viewers, in my country we don't say sports, we just say sport, for both the singular and plural. Just thought I'd mention that to avoid any confusion. Please note that I am not a Marxist. I don't consider myself anti-Marx. There's a lot of stuff I like about Marx's ideas, but I just identify more with some other folks.
Your friends saying that I'm trouble. I can't lie, I was raised in the struggle. And when it all goes off, I'll be there in the bubble right now. All I wanna do is bubble.
So, Sylvester Stallone is not really the status quo challenging type. As a screenwriter and filmmaker, his work is more of a celebration of various norms in our society, perhaps most notably with his glorification of the military and reinforcement of the same kinds of nationalistic myth towards militarism that the state promotes. And while that became the point of the Rambo films from First Blood Part 2 onwards, his other contemporaneous franchise, the Rocky series, also sought to support aspects of the status quo like nationalism and capitalism.
I can't hear you. What?
I want to learn to fight.
Yo, could you turn your robot down?
But it didn't start out that way, really. The first Rocky film is not really a celebration of capitalism or nationalism, at least not in a gratuitous way. However, it does buy into some foundational myths of any society based on capitalism and nationalism. Things like so-called meritocracy, pulling oneself up by one's bootstraps, the idea that the best way for an underprivileged person to improve their lot is to do so using the same systems that are exploiting them. The film works hard, especially in the first act, to establish itself some working-class bona fides. Rocky is a working-class guy who is down on his luck, who wants to get out of his fairly impoverished circumstances. He is working two jobs, one as a professional boxer whose career is really not going well, and one as hired muscle for a local mobster. Here we see Rocky involved in two types of parasitic exploitative social mechanism. One is not socially acceptable and is part of the underworld, but the other is socially acceptable and is part of mainstream, if somewhat niche, society. The guy who pays Rocky for his fight against Spider Rico at the start is keeping the vast majority of the profits of the fight for himself, because our society's system of coercive private hierarchies says that he is the one who deserves it, even though Rocky literally sweats and bleeds for it, and as a boxer is obviously more central to the draw of a boxing match than the guy who pays the rental fee for the venue and prints the posters. He represents the capitalist, capitalism being a system of economic exploitation at the national level. Rocky's other boss, the mobster, represents organized crime, a system of economic exploitation at the community level. The film correctly identifies both as bad, despite the differing legal status of the activities. It also identifies the problem of coercive hierarchy.
You put my stuff on Skid Row. I've been in that locker for 6 years and you put my stuff in a bag on Skid Row?
Mickey tells me what to do, I gotta do it, right, Rock?
And it identifies that Rocky is a victim of the lawful system, and both a victim and an agent of the unlawful one. Though it does of course depict Rocky as disliking the violent aspects of organized crime and wishing to conduct his loan shark collector's job without being violent. You want the audience to be on his side after all.
Did I give you a job this morning or I didn't?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
So why don't you break his thumb like I told you to? When you don't do what I tell you to do, you make me look bad, Rock.
I figure if I break the guy's thumb, he gets laid off, right? He can't make
Yeah, well,
no
don't
money,
figure it.
can't
Let me
pay
do the
up.
figuring, okay, Rock?
But while the film does identify that the lawful system of bosses exploiting workers is coercive, unjustifiably hierarchical, and exploitative, it then goes on to depict said socially acceptable parasitic system as also being the means of Rocky's elevation out of poverty. The film has Rocky realize that the reason he is at the bottom of a coercive hierarchy and not thriving in the boxing world is not because the system is wrong and at fault, but because he isn't dedicating enough time and energy to being a boxer. He's not taking it seriously enough, and is dividing his attentions by also working for the mobster. All he needs to do is take personal responsibility for his boxing career and pull himself up by his bootstraps by training really hard, and then capitalism will reward him greatly rather than exploiting him. Even though he loses the fight against Apollo Creed, his profile as a boxer will be increased massively, and thus assumedly his career will be going much better. Thus the film buys into one of the core myths of capitalism, that if you're poor and at the bottom of a shitty system, really that's on you. Just work harder and you'll become one of capitalism's winners. Yeah, the people at the bottom are being exploited, but it's their own fault, really. They're just lazy. Put yourself out there and go do some push-ups, you lazy bums. But the film also has themes that go against this message and unintentionally undermine it. I see this happening a lot. A piece of entertainment media like a movie or a show that is not setting out to be a critique of the status quo but ends up being one anyway if you think about it. I call this phenomenon being accidentally anti-capitalist, and Rocky is a really good example of it, I think. As a profession, boxing is such a potent metaphor for the evils of capitalism. Rocky is literally bleeding for a paycheck, which reminds me of this, an even more straightforward personification of the same thing: workers selling blood to make rent. This is actually happening in the US. Anyway, back to Rocky. He is sustaining head injuries and opening himself up to a fairly high likelihood of some amount of brain damage. You might say, but Garrett, he wants to be a boxer. It's his dream. He's not a slave to capitalism. He's a man trying to fulfill his dreams. And you're right about the first part. It is his dream to be a successful boxer. But as I mentioned before, at the start of the film, he is not proactively pursuing that dream. Yet he's still seeking as many fights as he can get.
Balboa, you get winner share, $65, less $15 locker and corner man, $5 shower and towel, and 7% tax. Comes to $40.55.
When do I fight again?
Maybe 2 weeks. Give me a call. The doctor should be in about 20 minutes.
The film tells us that at least part of the reason for that is that he needs money. In this scene, Rocky makes a joke while talking to his fish.
You know, if you guys could sing or dance, I wouldn't be doing this, you know.
Like I said, he's clearly joking around, but there's also some truth to what he's saying here, I think. If he didn't have to pay his bills, he probably wouldn't be seeking to do as many of these low-profile, non-career advancing fights as he is. Certainly not before he starts taking training more seriously. He needs the money. He's getting the tar beaten out of him on a regular basis in a way that will not help him fulfill his dreams or improve his bad financial situation, and it's all out of necessity. He's working 2 jobs because neither is earning him an adequate living, and when he does decide to try and take a more active role in improving his circumstances, in order to do so while fulfilling his dreams, the only choice he has is to do so via the same system that is screwing him over. Capitalism has backed him into a corner. Think about it. He has 3 choices. 1, he can starve. 2, he can become fully absorbed into organized crime and spend his life doing something he knows is unethical and hurts his community. 3, he can pursue his dreams, but only by fully submitting to a system he knows is exploiting him and the overwhelming majority of his colleagues. For many people, these 3 options are real, which is why fiction explores this so much. Season 4 of The Wire, for example, is all about this. The kids' only route out of poverty and despair are to prey on their community or to submit to a system that has been marginalizing and brutalizing them for their entire lives. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Rocky's depiction of capitalism. Now I'm going to be talking about something broader, but nevertheless of deep importance to the Rocky franchise. That being... Hey, wait a minute. You said you don't say sports. What gives? Yeah, but I also said I was doing merely the introduction to this segment. Chrissy will be covering most of it herself, so I went with the American terminology, but only for the title card. One thing I need to make real clear is that I am not trying to demonize sport by what I say here. I like a bunch of different sports. I'm also not trying to make fans of the specific sports I bring up feel in any way bad for enjoying them. Hey, now wait just a goddamn second here, buddy. You said sports. I heard it. Twice. Yeah, well, when I said we use the word sport for the plural, I meant just for the general large group plural. You know, like for talking about sport as a concept or just in vague terms. If we're talking about, say, a specific group of sports, as I did right there, we add the S. Yeah, I know it's confusing, alright, shut up. Anyway, back to what I was saying. I know British anarchists who love football, American anarchists who love baseball. What I'm about to say should have no bearing on whether or not you or anyone else enjoys football or baseball or whatever. What this is about is being aware of how these kinds of sports are used by certain groups within society. Oh, and by the way, society is kind of like how we use the word sport here grammatically. Talking about societies in general as a concept, you say society, like human society is problematic. But when you're grouping a small number of specific societies together, you know what? I'm going to stop talking about that. So what groups in society am I talking about? Well, there's a whole bunch that use people's love of sport in various nefarious ways. But here I am specifically referring to the state. I need to make it clear that I am not talking about some smoky backroom conspiracy of a particular group of individuals. In fact, the intentions of the state are not relevant. You could make the argument that the state actively wants to distract people away from political activism by pushing pursuits like sports fandom, and thus take up a good chunk of what free time they have away from being a cog in the machine. You could make that argument, but you don't need to, because ultimately their intentions don't matter. What matters is the end result, and that is the situation I just described. They don't have a whole lot of time to undertake the process of becoming well-versed in ideas that would, and have in the past, become a problem for the state and for the capitalists if they got really popular. This is headed off by the fact that these kinds of ideas are not part of the curriculum in our education systems, both public and private. So it's a whole new sociolect, a new lexicon one must learn in order to process and understand this stuff. And that's a serious undertaking. It takes time and effort, time which most folks are forced into spending doing other things.
That's why the propaganda system is so successful. Very few people are going to have the time or the energy or the commitment to carry out the constant battle that's required to get outside of, McNeil Lehrer or, Dan Rather or somebody like that. The easy thing to do, you come home from work, you're tired, you've had a busy day, you're not going to spend the evening carrying out a research project. So you turn on the tube, you say it's probably right. Or you look at the headlines in the paper and then you watch the sports or something. And that's basically the way the system of indoctrination works. Sure, the other stuff is there, but you're going to have to work to find it.
Let's take a look at two quick examples. Person A is a full-time worker. When they get home from a long day's work, they don't want to engage in that kind of radical political activism. They want to watch some shows, listen to some music. They want to relax. Person B is a sufferer of a severe mental disorder and is not able to work. The mental health systems of their society are hot garbage and have never been of much help. Person B spends most of their time coping with their disorder and struggling to interact with the large welfare bureaucracies of the state that they rely on. When not doing either of those two things, they want to watch some shows, listen to some music. They want to relax. And one thing both these people may choose to do to relax is to watch some sport. So why am I talking about this? Because if these kinds of activities are what people are going to be spending their free time on, it makes sense, and indeed is crucial, to look at the effect they have sociologically, the kinds of messages they reinforce and support. In the case of sport, at every level, sport reinforces ideas like the competition-based model of capitalist society. At the local level, they reinforce ideas like tribalism, enthusiastic support of one's high school or university, and dislike of rival high schools and universities, social divisions between cities, towns, and regions.
I remember in high school already, I was pretty old, I suddenly asked myself at one point, why do I care if my high school team wins the football game? I mean, I don't know anybody on the team, they have nothing to do with me. I mean, why am I cheering for my team? It doesn't make any sense, But the point is, it does make sense. It's a way of building up irrational attitudes of submission to authority and, group cohesion behind, leadership elements. In fact, it's training in irrational jingoism.
At the national level, one of the things they reinforce is, of course, nationalism. National flags and other national symbols like the bald eagle, recitations of the national anthem, the Pledge of Allegiance, all of that is on frequent display. Then you get stuff like this. The US military making deals with the private institutions of popular competitive sport to do flyovers and displays like this.
The roar of a military flyover is the highlight of NFL pregame activities.
And the Padres take the field in their camo uni.
Pre-game, a full field flag was unveiled in honor of our troops.
A tribute to those who protect our way of life.
There is Dad, home from Korea. And here's a moment that makes you proud to be an American.
Please direct your attention high above the scoreboard and welcome Sergeant First Class Richard Babineau as he rappels down from the arena catwalk for tonight's ceremonial puck drop.
I'm guessing I don't have to explain why this kind of stuff is deeply worrying. And sport also reinforces nationalism on the international level, of course, but that kind of goes without saying, so I'm not going to delve into that. The last thing I want to say about these popular sports like football, baseball, cricket, and in my country, rugby, is that the energy and creative intellectual attentions most dedicated fans display is such an impressive thing, as Chomsky talks about here.
And in fact, it's striking to see the intelligence that's used by ordinary people in sports. I mean, you listen to radio stations where people call in. They have the most exotic information and understanding about, all kind of arcane issues.
I can't help but think what a great resource that kind of social mental capacity could be to the cause of political activism if directed towards that instead. Not because I'm annoyed at people for what they choose to spend their time on, that's not it at all. No, it's a reminder to those seeking to tear down the systems of domination and oppression and forge a better world. It's a reminder that when the time comes, when the situation is so dire and so monstrous that the people have finally had enough and they rise up, we are going to have that great resource. Because an organized people, proactively saying that they aren't going to take it anymore, that they are going to stand up for what is right no matter what, well, that is one of the most awe-inspiring and unstoppable things in this world. So even when the situation seems so massively stacked against us now, the time will come when that is no longer the case. And when it does, well, that same amazing capacity that enables people to so knowledgeably and enthusiastically participate in huge, complex social activities like popular professional sport, well, that energy and will is going to be going towards a different kind of huge, complex, organized social activity. Well, that's my guest segment. Thanks for watching. Back to you, Chris.